Hello, welcome to Pandooradom, your premier channel for all things mysterious and interesting. I am your host, Miles Gray, and here my co-host joins us, Paul. How are
Yes,
you?
I'm Paul. Yes, I'm Paul Cradle. Let me attempt to get my 'cause I have to speak in the microphone directly. I can't do that very well with video on. There it goes. Okay, we can edit that out. So go ahead.
Yes.
What did you just ask me?
I was just asking how you are, or
Oh,
basically just inviting you in to join us.
yes, doing very well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate your asking. So you told me that right now in your locale there's a major earthquake going on relatively nearby. Is that right?
I got a message from Google Play Services that says there was a 5.3 about 147 kilometers away.
Wow.
Looks like it was in the ocean just south of General Santos City. So that gives
Oh
away where
yeah.
I am in
Right.
Mindanao.
Right.
Not a secret, but so
Oh,
that's interesting. Um,
yeah. We're gonna have to follow up on that.
so
Do you think there will be major
yeah,
effects from this? I mean, it's on the Richter scale. I
I
mean,
mean,
that's
well, to me, it's nothing. I mean, because in this location, I mean, where we are, we've had I can't remember how big it was. Eight is coming to mind, but it couldn't have been eight. That's huge,
yeah.
isn't it?
Well,
I'll have to check
that's a
that
big one.
out. I think maybe it was six or something. But anyway, it did feel like a boat. It was kind of fun, actually. So, yeah, in the past few years, for some reason, Mindanao has had an uptick in earthquakes. And the first one that I felt, I was lying down on the floor and it just felt like the floor moved. That's it. But
Wow. And it was just a
later,
was it a
within a
single
few
movement?
months though, yeah, it was just like one movement. Later that year, though, we had ones that were almost difficult to keep standing up outside, and they lasted for several seconds,
That is
like a boat. Yeah,
wow,
that's
that's
insane, isn't
incredible. It is quite
it?
insane.
Yeah,
Did you witness any damage to buildings or anything of that nature?
I didn't, but I saw videos posted online and photos of structural damage, and can't remember if anybody died. Isn't that sad? I should, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
didn't
We're
matter to
all
me.
judging you, Paul.
Well,
I shouldn't I shouldn't make light of it.
your own your own toothache is more devastating than a million people dying in an earthquake on the other side of the world. Well, maybe not a million, but
Well,
hundreds.
yeah, that does seem to be the human condition to a degree, yeah.
Mm, mm.
I was in Nepal for a while right before the major earthquake hit there, and I left right before it happened, actually. And the place that I was staying, I
Mm.
guess, collapsed. I
Oh
mean,
my
it
gosh,
it
where you
it
had been
flooded
staying?
while I was there. It flooded while I was there, and it damaged some of my equipment. And then I left,
Oh,
and then right after
oh,
there was this major
oh.
earthquake, and people were asking me for
Oh,
money.
so you were in the flood, but not the earthquake.
Well, it wasn't a flood really. It was just that the building itself got flooded. It wasn't an actual, major flood
Oh,
across the city.
so the building got flooded. Was it
Yeah,
the
but
pipes or
it
something?
must have been the pipes. Because I was on the third or fourth
Mm,
floor, and I just woke up one afternoon because I was taking a nap, I think, and it wasn't there when I went to take a
mm,
nap. And then I get up and I thought I was dreaming or something because the
mm.
floor, it was a pretty big room. The floor was something like there must have been about 6 inches to 8 inches of water just
Mm.
uniformly across the floor. And I think most of my equipment was on chairs or a desk, but there were a few things that were neatly stacked on the floor. And yeah, it was pretty shocking. I couldn't believe. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
that shocking compared, given some of the places I've slept, but honestly, I wasn't that
yeah.
surprised to be honest. It wasn't so bad. I mean, things like that don't bother me as much as they might some. I don't know. I just have a certain kind of flexibility. I might
Uh-huh.
have a different
Yeah.
reaction if I woke up underwater, but when it's still on the floor.
Well, I actually had a flood specific to my room, but this
Oh,
was on the
another room specific flood. Okay,
this was on the fourth floor, I believe, in
pretty close.
Cambodia
Wow.
because the room they gave me, like there was a reason that was unoccupied when I came. It was because it would flood when when it rains too badly, and so it was weird because it was like half the room was flooded,
To what level?
and I had my bed that I personally chose was just to sleep on like a pad on the floor, and so that got soggy and moldy, and I had to throw it out. And
Wow.
had a I had a new phone that I bought that was on the floor, and it just so yeah, I should have been covered for damages or something, but no, this was Cambodia, so
Yeah, similar
no, and
experience
then
in the park.
yeah,
Yeah.
as like the one thing you expect from having an apartment is that it's shelter, but no, and then there was no protection against it either. It's just
Right, right.
I
Yeah,
will.
that's
I mean, if there, my luck, there probably was something local, some local ordinance or something I could invoke and get twist the landlord's arm, but probably wouldn't have been worth the trouble.
right. I mean, there may be
So,
protections technically, but especially for expats, uh,
mm,
where you may not know the language fluently or at least enough. I mean, I would say that there are many
yeah,
expats who live in places like Cambodia and nearby countries that you and I met in our time in these locales, and they may actually speak the local language or languages relatively proficiently for a foreigner, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to read the laws and understand them. I mean, we're talking about the difference between if
oh,
you're in Thailand,
yeah,
colloquial Thai and royal Thai, so it's a
mm,
big diff.
oh,
And you really have to kind of know the
yeah.
higher register in order to understand the
Oh,
law and how you can
oh my
protect
God.
yourself.
Yeah. But yeah, most of the time, if you're just a dude, it seems like lawyers aren't worth it. So anyway, there's another. There,
that's that's a motto to live by, Paul. Lawyers aren't worth it. Although
well,
sadly sometimes
it's
they are
often
needed,
more
I will
trouble.
admit. What's that?
What?
I was just
What?
saying as an aside, sometimes lawyers are needed to. I mean, I have to
Yeah,
admit that you can't just completely disavow lawyers and that's the
I
end of that.
know.
I mean, clearly there are
Sometimes they're
times
worth
that
it, but
necessitate it.
yeah, sometimes a necessity. Yeah, I think I was just referring to that. When you're just a dude, a lot of those times when their expenses aren't going to be worth what you could retrieve, and they know that too, and they often just turn you down. Um, I
Right.
had an experience with that, not recently, but like last year in Korea. Well, I'm not even really sure I can get into this if I should get into this or not, but it was like I I wanted to retreat. I wanted to demand official repayment of my wages because they hadn't been paid properly the first time.
Yeah, you told me about that. I
Yeah,
remember that.
yeah. And basically what I was trying to do, to be honest, was get paid. Well, I can't really say just get paid twice. It was more than that. I like they owed me they by the letter of the law they actually owed me officially more than double the cash that they actually slipped me under the table illegally. But
Yeah,
no matter how, no matter where I went, no matter who I contacted, it just wasn't worth it. And I
that's
tried and
the
tried.
that's the
Yeah.
unfortunate reality. I mean, unless you are going to make it your life's work for the moment. I mean, it is technically possible that you could
Mhm.
try to wring it out of them. But like I said, it would become your
Yeah.
life's work, at least for the
Yeah.
time being.
Yeah. And
And,
after a
I'd,
long battle, I
you
might
may,
have gotten $3,000 at most, maybe.
right. When
And
I
they'd
was
have
in,
to.
uh,
Mhm.
I would just wanted to add, when I was in Manzhouli in China on the Russian border, when I was working there in 2008, 2009. By the time I ended up leaving, which I actually had to, normally I wouldn't do something like this, but I escaped during the middle of the night dressing up as a Russian smuggler, which were pretty common
Mhm.
in that area. And that was the only way to get out because it was well known that our boss had a network of sort of grandmother spies that would watch from their windows and they would tell her what her foreigners were doing. She would call the boss, or they would call the boss, and they would say, okay, yeah, foreigner number one, the darker one, he just passed down 4th Street and he went into a meat shop. Or, oh, yeah, foreigner number two, the lighter one, he just went into a ticket store. I don't know what kind of ticket, but I can see a piece of paper in his hand. So you might want to, check on him and see what he's up to. So they were constantly informing her about our movements in this little town. And
Mm.
we were really the only foreigners within literally hundreds of kilometers. We were in the middle of the open steppe near Mongolia. And there
Mhm.
was the Russian border. I mean, that could you might consider that foreign, but and there, other than that, we were the only non-Chinese or non-Russian smuggler population, just me and my coworker in that school, other than one other person who was an Australian man whom I don't believe I ever actually met him in person, but I had heard about him that he just married a Chinese woman and he was living his life as a sort of naturalized Chinese person. I mean, he wasn't a citizen, I guess, but he was naturalized in spirit. And he didn't care about anything about Australia. He just completely just sank into a Chinese identity of a kind.
Oh
And
my God.
he didn't care about us either. He couldn't stand us. He thought, like you guys are
Yeah.
foreigners, and he thought of himself
I've
as
heard of
local.
that. I've heard of that happening on YouTube channels about foreigners. Sometimes in some of these smaller cities in China, you'll find this foreigner tucked away who considers himself really integrated
Yeah,
and doesn't even really like other expats
right, right.
who kind of should, because they're the ones who actually have a lot more common in him with the local Chinese. But I don't know if that ever bites them back. It seems to me that it's a sort of betrayal. It's
It's an interesting question. I mean, you could turn it around and say, let's say you have a man who's from China, and then he moves to
yeah,
the United States, and he tries to completely integrate into his local Iowan community,
yeah.
mostly
I
farm
see where you're going.
boys. And in a
Right.
way, maybe he has an accent and he seems more Chinese to the locals than he would like, but yet maybe he's there for 30, 40 years. And I'm not even talking about the guy who runs the gas station store. I'm talking about a guy who becomes like an American farmer type, and even has like a
Yeah.
piece of a wheat stalk coming out of it, off his lip.
Yeah.
And
Well, but the United States was always considered an immigrant country, though, where you were supposed to be able to immigrate,
yeah,
not
that's
China.
true. That's a good
You
point,
know,
actually.
and but I
Yeah,
can
it's
see
true.
both
Yeah,
sides
that's
of
true.
it. I can
America's
see
kind of
both
a
sides of it.
melting pot.
You can't. Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
become a Chinese citizen, but you are encouraged to become a U.S. citizen if you've been there for a while.
Right.
So,
That's
but
a good point.
I'm
There is a
trying
difference. You're right. It's not exactly the same thing. Good point.
oh, but
But
another thing though, well, um, but
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 oh
there's
yeah.
almost the opposite effect though in the US with the cultural diversity and the DIE and everything. People now are almost being encouraged to hold on to whatever non-white ethnic outsider status they may be able to either have or rummage up from the past or
Right.
something.
But
So
I would add to that, Paul, that while that's what's happening on the surface, what it's actually going towards is an increased uniformity of identity. So on the one hand, on the surface, what's being said is, okay, you have all these different intersectional identities, you're hyphenated in every possible way. But what that is really moving towards is a kind of neo American ideal or an American neo ideal. That is to say, that for the longest time, America has had this ideal of becoming an American. And
yeah.
this is essentially the same thing, but it's simply been altered for its character. So rather than you transcending your foreignness to become an all-American American, now the way to become an all-American American is to embrace your supposed intersectional identities.
Yeah,
So
as if
you
to
know,
stand out
so
from the
so
plain
so
vanilla
oh,
America.
what I mean is that at the end of the day, it's the same conformity that's being sought. It's you're basically
Mm.
running towards the same godhead of Americana. There's really no
So you're saying now
no
that's what it
difference.
means to be an American. Like to say a Chinese guy or gal comes over and now the way to become an American is to become a hyphenated and stand proud as a hyphenated American.
Right. Well, I shouldn't say
But
there's
see,
no difference, but there is
then
it's
the
more
claim,
minuscule than we would think. Yeah. But you're
yeah.
right. That's exactly it. I mean, it's simply it's the same ends. It's just a different means, I would say.
Well, I think maybe what they're claiming now is that this idea of being able to become an American just like everybody else, if you were an ethnic outsider, was always an illusion. If there was a window when certain white people for I don't know how long it was, 100 years, 200 years could come over and then they could be fully integrated Americans. And by the letter of the law, technically that was open to everybody. But I think they're claiming that it couldn't ever really happen for certain ethnic minorities.
Right.
You
But
know
what
what I mean?
I do, but what I would add though is I think it doesn't really matter your ethnic identity or what color you are as an immigrant to America, because the first generation of immigrants, no matter what, even if you're from England, you're still a foreigner ultimately. You're not an American in the more advanced sense. That is to say, even the colonists who were born in England and then they set up
Oh,
shop in America. And then,
oh.
but then it's later generations that are born on American soil and they're born believing that they're Americans before
Mm,
anything else. It really doesn't
mm,
matter what color they are, what their supposed ethnic background is, because first and foremost,
mm.
they are um, Americans. And
So
obviously, they're,
the very first Americans
well,
you're saying weren't really Americans, they were rebels. They were rebels. Not really. You know what I
Well,
mean?
yeah,
Like
I mean, yeah,
the
I do
first
know what you mean. I mean, kind of. I mean, the thing is, I don't want to overly simplify, of course, because obviously there is such thing as racism. There is such thing as prejudice based, on racial and ethnic lines. I mean, I should know. Um,
Mhm.
because of my my, whatever it is, ethnicity or what have you, religion or, you know, peoplehood. So it's a very complicated thing that, clearly there is such thing as prejudice, especially in America and its history, but I think it's a much more complicated and subtle phenomenon than current politics and critical theory would have you
Mhm.
believe. I mean, it's a very simplified way of looking at the world. It's
Yeah.
very, it reminds me of the movie, what is that called? Idiocracy. You kind of just push the buttons to say what's wrong with you at the hospital. Uh, I
Um,
mean, it's about that level of thought. I mean, it is the thing. You go to university, for a classical education in another era, and you're exposed to deep level critical thought, stuff that bothers you. Like, I don't want to be here. This is difficult, man. Come on. Like, they're saying, okay, I want you to write a paper, guys. But not only do you need to approach this question, you need to have, there are several sub questions and then sub questions. I want you to relate this to several different fields of inquiry. And, it's starting to become, headache material. That's how you
mhm.
really, really learn. I mean, it's annoying, but that is really how you truly learn. But then what is reigning now, what passes for intellectuality today in many academic circles, which is completely blindingly bizarre, is this highly simplified, easy press button pseudo intellectualism. And I'm sorry, I'm not saying that as a as a defaming, cruel byword. I really mean in the nicest possible way that it's just not very smart. I mean,
You
I'm not even
mean things
saying
like
that they're,
critical race theory,
what's that?
like critical race theory, and
I'm I'm
the
I'm
people
specific I'm specifically talking about critical theory in general. I mean, this is
mm-hmm.
something that a number of commentators talk about, but I'm just talking about from the level of some of the original philosophers in their books who are sort of behind the more basic principles that led to these latter day first first of all academic movements and then later more mainstream phenomena. When you actually read these books that these movements are based on, it's much more philosophical, much more fundamental uh, sort of concepts that led to a bloom of activities in the greater socio-political universe. But when you read the original
Yeah.
ideals, even those
Mm-hmm.
are questionable at best. And you're reading them, and yeah, as a philosopher, you read them and you say, okay, this is interesting, but I already see a number of possible questions. I see a number of possible um, challenges to the statements
Mm.
that they're making. This is a
Yeah.
logical fallacy. This is a logical fallacy. Here, the guy is citing something that is not even is known to be a non-credible source. There are things that come up in the course of what I would call
Yeah.
academic reading that you learn from a
Mm-hmm.
classical education that prepare you to understand all the problems with this supposed monolithically brilliant piece of philosophy that you're reading. But if you have the right background, you'll already know that not only is the original source material problematic, so is the bloom of socio-political machinations that are a result of this mal philosophy. So it's not
Yeah.
only what has developed, it's not only the offspring that is problematic, that's the favorite term. Uh, it's the source material itself. It's
Yeah.
the primary material that's been originally tainted. And I'm sorry that sounds a little bit about like original sin, which is another sort of
Mm.
that also informs critical theory in a particular way, a sort of modified form of the original sin concept from Christianity. Uh,
Well,
so
Miles,
yeah,
go ahead. Well,
uh,
I'll go ahead and say it. I'll say it. I don't understand none of it. but,
I don't know if any of us do,
but,
Paul. I don't think anybody really
yeah,
understands
see,
this.
and that's why I'm not really afraid to say that. And I'm gonna follow up saying that um but the people who do claim to write these theories and the DEI people and everything, they don't really either, but they're depending on slipping through a lot of things that just can't be questioned. They're depending on you not having a right to defend claims. Otherwise, you're racist.
Yeah,
You
that's
racist. If you question this or that, it's because you racist. You see, you've got this implicit
what
bias you're born with. You've got
well,
all this stuff that
yeah, it's
yeah,
a
you just
mashup.
can't question.
It's a mashup
Mm-hmm.
of claims that they cut sort of a meta treatment of of uh of socio-political changes. They're banking on the idea that you won't be able to, number one, defend your position, and number two, won't be able to question their position. That's number one. And
Exactly.
then and
It's
then
like, yeah.
but there's a further issue, Paul, that is that it's sort of pulling you into a debate. Well, you may treat it as a debate, for the other side, it's not really a debate, it's something else. But you're, more or less pulled into a debate, which is an exercise in futility.
Mm-hmm.
In order to truly change what's going on, a completely different approach is required because these elements don't play by the rules. And then the
Yeah,
question
it's like you
becomes,
engage them
should
at
you
all.
as well? Are you going to take the high road,
Yeah,
or are you
you
going to
engage
find
them at
another
all,
approach?
you do.
I'm not
You
talking,
engage them at all. Yeah.
well, I'm not talking
And
about, I don't mean to suggest becoming radicalized or becoming martial
no,
or anything like that.
no,
I'm talking
but
about
I
more
will
like
say,
academic. I'm sorry, what's that?
but it's I
Paul, I think we
will
need to
say it's
get
more
back
like
in. Sorry,
yeah,
this is bad.
it's more
Sorry,
like right.
there's a lot of crosstalk. Let's go back to you, Paul, and back to you, Miles.
So I'll go ahead and say, um, yeah, what was I gonna say?
Yeah, back to
Anyway,
you, Paul. Sorry.
um, so yeah, I was gonna say there's a lot more meta conversation that needs to take place about the style of conversation that we're allowed to have. Coincidentally, following our interruption, we have to talk about how we're going to conduct the conversation. And there's often this claim that we need to have an honest discussion about race in this country or something. But the thing is, uh, if
Not
you
honest.
try, if you try, then you're considered racist because there are all kinds of things you can't say, and we can't even talk about the things we can't say.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you take a look at, say, the black illegitimacy rate, and you think it would be good for blacks if we tried to get that back into a safer zone that was better for them. Well, you can't really say that without being racist, even though it's like you can't point out something that would be good for them without being racist. And I guess it's like, it's getting to the point where, or it's been this way for a while. That cartoonist, who was that? He just said, people of this one color, just get away from those people of that other color. It's over. Just get away. And of course, even he was banned, shadow banned, rejected, called a racist. But so you really can't talk about it. I think what you have to do is just quietly tiptoe away from all of this without saying that's what you're doing.
But the
And
problem
I
is,
think that that's the
I'm
most
sorry.
intelligent thing to do that people are in fact doing. They just won't talk about it and they tiptoe away from it. And that's the only way you can save yourself. But I already can't really do that because we're already talking about it. But back to you, Miles.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. I have to say, like, I'm a little bit unsure about how, and I'm not one for policing speech, as you well know. I'm wondering, just for the purposes of the show, but also in general about, there's euphemistic drift, and we never know quite the proper term for any demographic or supposed demographic. Um, do you say the Jews? Do you say Jewish people? Do you say black or blacks? Do you say African Americans, people of color? For me, people of color is already suggestive of colored people. To me, it's kind of like an inversion of that, or not an inversion. It's what do you call it? A circumlocution of that.
Mhm.
No, it's already distinct, yes, but here is euphemistic drift. I mean, it's one of those things where even people of color is going to become a faux pas within a few years or less, and then you'll have to come up with another more polite form. So I think it's very problematic because what we're trying to do now is find neutral terms to refer to specific demographics while we talk about the bigger issue. But what's happening is we're getting stuck on the words themselves. And so,
Mm,
we're getting into word games where we should be talking about the actual socio-political situation. We want to talk about the problems with critical theory versus, say, civil rights. They're two very vastly different things, completely different approaches to socio-political reality, both in America and abroad. Vastly different outcomes in terms of application of principle. Even though I think that sometimes people mix them up and think that they're basically the same, they're not at all. And so in a way, if we're getting stuck on terms, but we're worrying about whether or not this is an okay thing to say or to call someone. Not to say it's not important. I mean, obviously, you don't want to unnecessarily say racist things. You don't,
mm,
purposely, deliberately choosing slurs is one thing, but when it's a question of like, I want to be polite, I want to be basically an accepting, tolerant person, but I need a term to use that not everybody is going to get mad about. And it's been commonly said that if you have anything important to say, you are necessarily going to you're necessarily going to offend somebody. You can't possibly say something of import without hurting somebody's feelings. There is no truly completely neutral thing other than, I don't know, I like milk, but that must offend somebody. I mean, that might offend a vegan perhaps, or someone. I mean, I
mm.
suppose, um I don't know. I mean,
Sorry
there's
about the dogs here. Do you hear
Jainism,
dogs barking?
depending on what's that.
Can you hear dogs barking?
I always hear dogs barking.
I mean, here in the phone.
uh oh, in the Philippines, yeah, I can hear some
Yeah, you can hear the
Filipino
dogs. Watch
dogs
me
in the
get
back.
my shit
I mean, the
out.
this is terrible. I mean, I can hear some dogs of the Philippines barking.
Yeah, yeah, they all live at this house. Most of them don't even have a
Terrible.
name.
What's that?
Most of them don't even have a name. They keep barking at who knows
So they're,
what.
they're like local.
No, there are. There are.
Well, here we have a lot of cats. This is the country of cats here in the Levant. We
Ah,
have dogs too, but I mean, a lot of them don't have names, but they're kind of neighborhood cats. Um,
yeah. As soon as they open the door, they shut up. But then as soon as they close it again, they bark right back up. What the heck are you barking about, guys?
Yeah.
They're they're scared of us too. When anytime we want them out of the house, they just flinch away in fear, cower away, head down out the door.
Yep, I can understand that. Um, the
So
thing is, yeah, I
yeah,
understand. Okay, so
so Miles,
um,
we've covered a lot of territory
yes, we
this
have.
time, from earthquakes. I wanted to add something, interject something here. You know, the guy we both met in Thailand, and
Oh yeah, yeah. The
and,
guy
he cooked for you a
who
lot. He
was
liked you,
the
as a lot
guy
of people do.
the
Yeah,
guy who was sort of in a relationship with a hired fun worker,
with a what now?
a hired
Oh,
fun worker. Remember, we're on YouTube.
oh.
A hired fun
Well,
worker.
let's not say that.
Well, we
All
have
right.
to. We have to because otherwise we're going to we're going to
Well,
get demonetized if we haven't already.
yeah. Well, all right. But she
Euphemistic
wasn't.
drift, my
She
man.
wasn't that. She wasn't that to him or with him.
Well, but
Uh,
it doesn't. But that's again, this is not about what it is to him. We're coming up with a sort of a neologism or a nonce for the moment that we're just using. Like you know what I'm
yeah.
talking about. There's no
Um,
ambiguity, I presume,
yeah.
right?
No.
If
No.
I
I'm
say
not
that,
arguing. I'm not arguing. Yeah. Not arguing about that. But anyway, what was I going to say about him? Oh
I see.
yeah.
Okay.
It's what reminded me was because his house was flooded by pipes.
Another flood.
The
What is this? What
pipes.
is
Yeah,
this with all of us
no, this was
expats getting
this,
flooded?
this
I
was
mean, in our
some
apartments,
time
like
ago. I
what's
think this. So I've been in contact with him off and on, um, yeah, ever since, and yeah. So that's how I know. I can't remember. It must have been like a year ago. The pipes were flooded, and I think it was
Monster
it
Pipe?
was the downstairs, and I think he said it was because of some neighbor that came over and intentionally wanted to destroy property to spite the landlord or something, or maybe it
Man,
was a local drug dealer involved.
like
Something.
I wouldn't
You
be
can see that on
surprised.
YouTube, I hope. It was somebody like that,
I
local
actually don't
person.
know if I don't know if you can say
Yeah,
that, man.
I
I don't know. I'm
don't
not sure.
know.
I think you can. See. That's the thing with her. I mean, I'm not trying to be a policeman here, but I'm concerned. I don't know. I don't think you can say that. I'm afraid. I
Yeah,
think that you have to use
maybe
another
maybe
made up
it was
euphemism.
substance. Maybe it was a substance bookie. I don't know.
That's oh
That would be
man,
for
that's
gambling.
that's pretty
I don't
funny.
think you should talk about
Like
gambling
ad
either.
libs.
So I was
The
trying to do
problem, oh my gosh.
a
Um,
euphemism into gambling, and you're not supposed to do gambling either. So substance retailer,
yeah, yeah,
Retail-
I mean,
Schedule 1 retailer.
oh gosh, that's even, yeah, I mean, that's already getting into the territory.
Schedule, a
Yeah,
Schedule 1
it's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm doing is I'm playing lawyer here. I mean, the thing is I don't really know the law, the law as it were well enough. I
Okay.
mean, I really just have a knowledge in passing, if I can say that. So
Well, this has been interesting, Miles.
yeah.
I'm thinking this is probably the kind of it's interesting, and I hope whoever does watch it will be kind of intrigued about the kinds of things that might be coming up on our show. But I really think that it's not going to get views. But I also think that no matter what you put in to the very beginnings of a YouTube channel, it won't get views, almost no matter what you do. So don't worry about that.
Oh, I
But
don't.
here's what, yeah, good. And because our last video, I did surprisingly well to me, but I think YouTube gave up. I think the algorithm gave up pushing it. It's not going to. It's going to be pretty much free